Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of the forthcoming book, Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating. Join me here every week as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food and their bodies.
Anti-diet revolution, we're for health at every size. Eat the foods you like. Food Psych.
Hey there, welcome to episode 195 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and today I'm talking with Sofie Hagen, a comedian, fellow podcaster, and author of the new book, Happy Fat. We talk about how fatphobia affects people of all sizes, why rhetoric about individual responsibility is oppressive, how science often gets twisted by diet culture and the media, Sophie's own path to self-acceptance after going through childhood trauma related to her body size, and so much more. It's a great conversation, and I can't wait to share it with you in just a moment. But first, I'll answer this week's listener question, which is from a listener named Jen, who writes, "Hi, Christy. I love Food Psych. It's been an incredible resource for me during my recovery and healing from weight bias. I'm curious about your thoughts on the definition of quote-unquote healthy framed within the health at every size paradigm. This question is one that I'm trying to understand completely in my own journey to rid myself of weight bias, especially in regards to larger-bodied people. In a conversation with my husband, we were discussing how to define health. I know that health encompasses many things, but my husband made a comment. He said, "I feel like a good indicator is if someone can walk X distance without having any physical difficulties, then they are healthy. My concern is that this simple idea is more about fitness than it is about health. How are fitness level and health related? I know that you can be quote-unquote fit without being healthy, but is it possible to be healthy without being fit? How does this fit into health at every size? Again, thank you for doing this show and giving so many struggling people hope." So thanks, Jen, for that great question and for your lovely feedback. And before I answer, just my usual disclaimer that these answers and this podcast in general are for informational and educational purposes only and are not a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice. So this is a great question, and you're totally right to push back against your husband's definition. So health really isn't just about fitness, which is what he's talking about here, like you said, although his definition also has ableism kind of wrapped up in it because there are many people who will never be able to walk the distance he's talking about because of disabilities or because of age or whatever reason, but that doesn't automatically make them quote-unquote unhealthy. So you can definitely have health without being quote-unquote fit. And we'll talk a little bit more about why I say have health instead of be healthy. So diet culture frames health as a binary that's used to globally judge people and food or movement choices, right? It's framed as this adjective that exists on a binary. It's healthy or unhealthy. But in reality, health is not that at all. So that's diet culture's version, but the health at every size version is totally different. So we as humans are constantly evolving and changing over time, and things are always happening to us that are beyond our control as well. So, we're not just making day-to-day choices about how to care for ourselves, we're also existing in the world and moving through the world with whatever identities that we have that have different things happen to us. And so by its very nature, the concept of health can't be the static and binary thing that diet culture makes it out to be. So the health at every size movement views health as a resource or capacity, which is why I say have health. And that language comes from the Association of Size Diversity and Health, which holds the trademark on the term health at every size, or HAES, and which developed the HAES principles. And so, ASDA, the Association of Size Diversity and Health, is a wonderful resource on this. And I think their definition of health is great. So I wanted to share that with you here. So they say the Association for Size Diversity and Health, or ASDA, affirms a holistic definition of health, which cannot be characterized as simply the absence of a physical or mental illness, limitation, or disease. Rather, health exists on a continuum that varies with time and circumstances for each individual. Health should be conceived as a resource or capacity available to all, regardless of health condition or ability level, and not as an outcome or objective of living. Pursuing health is neither a moral imperative nor an individual obligation, and health status should never be used to judge, oppress, or determine the value of an individual. I love that definition because it packs so much in there, right? It captures the fact that health is not some static state that you magically attain by making certain individual choices, and it's not simply limited to the physical dimension of health either. So health isn't just about fitness or nutrition the way your husband and so many other people in diet culture think it is, because someone can be incredibly quote-unquote fit by diet culture standards and yet be totally suffering in their overall mental and physical health because of disordered eating. We see that all the time in people who fit diet culture's supposed picture of health, right? But they're secretly struggling with orthorexia or other forms of disordered eating, and they're totally miserable behind the scenes. And I know that we have thousands of people listening who are in that boat. And, Jen, who asked the question, it sounds like you're kind of familiar with this idea too, and maybe you were in that boat as well. Maybe that's what brought you to this podcast in the first place, was being quote unquote fit, but feeling like your health was suffering actually. And then on the flip side, people cannot do much physical activity, right? Not have a lot of quote unquote fitness, and not eat according to diet culture's rules, like not eat the foods it deems quote unquote healthy, and actually be in the best health of their lives because they're recovering from disordered eating and healing all of the harm that it caused to their physical and mental health. So health is not just this one-size-fits-all thing. It doesn't look a certain way. And in fact, the idea that there is one sort of picture of health is extremely oppressive. And the Hayes definition of health really accounts for that. It accounts for people like me and millions of others like me who live with chronic illnesses and go through ebbs and flows with them. So for example, like right now, I'm at a point in my life when I experience very few symptoms from my chronic conditions, and I feel thankfully well-resourced in terms of my overall health, right? My capacity for health my tank feels full health-wise. But also, I'll never not have these conditions. I'll always carry these diagnoses with me, right? Pre-existing conditions like millions of us have. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm quote unquote unhealthy. Although, of course, my feelings of well-being will certainly go through ups and downs throughout my life as I live with these conditions and whatever circumstances arise for me, like managing the conditions, and also whatever challenges come up for me as I age. And that will happen for all of us, regardless of whether or not you have pre-existing conditions now, which so many of us do, really it's the majority. But even if you don't, even if you're one of those lucky few who don't have any chronic health conditions now, don't have any pre-existing conditions, you will age and you will experience health challenges from that. So we will all go through ebbs and flows in our sort of resourcing for health across our lifespan. We'll all go through ebbs and flows of our well-being. Another key point here is that Hayes also acknowledges the social determinants of health, which are hugely important in determining our overall well-being. So the social determinants of health are the things that are outside of behavioral or genetic control, outside of our individual control. So things like access to medical care, experiences of poverty and deprivation and how those affect our health, environmental exposures, like exposure to dirty air or water that's been polluted, right? And experiences of stigma and discrimination that we face in the world. And those can profoundly affect people's well-being and health too, as I'm always talking about on the podcast. And research shows that social determinants of health account for 70% of modifiable health outcomes at the population level, whereas all health behaviors, like the individual behaviors you might engage in to support your health, only account for 30%. So 70%, the vast majority, is due to things outside of our personal control. And when you look at nutrition and physical activity by themselves, when you break those out from the 30% of all health behaviors, nutrition and physical activity only account for 10%, a mere 10% of all of our modifiable health outcomes. And that's a tiny proportion of our overall well-being. And of course, diet culture makes them out to be the be-all, end-all of health, right? Diet culture makes it out to be that food will make or break your health, that physical activity will make or break your health. And if you're not doing those things, quote unquote, perfectly, or having a thin body, then your health is going to suffer. And that is just not true because, again, those those behaviors, physical activity and nutrition, only account for 10% of our modifiable health outcomes at the population level. And when I say modifiable health outcomes, by the way, that doesn't include our genetics, which are another key factor determining our health. So you can have all your modifiable, health outcomes be like on point, like be super privileged and not experience the discrimination or the negative effects of poverty or all of those things in terms of the social determinants, and also be doing behaviors that support your health. But still, your genetics can influence your health and cause you to have a disease or health condition that you don't have any control over either. So really, health is so far outside of our individual control, the way the diet culture makes it out to be, right? It makes it out to be that health is entirely within our control, and that is just not true. Health is very minimally within our control. So the bottom line is that health is a really complex, multifaceted thing that can't be reduced to just, can you walk X distance without any trouble? Because health is a resource or capacity that all of us can have access to if and when we choose. And we all deserve to be able to have equal access to it as well, although we're under no obligation to pursue it. So I hope that helps. And if you want to submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, you can go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. And then if you want to ask me any question you want and have me answer it a lot more quickly than I can here, you can come join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. The course has a wealth of audio and written content that teaches you the principles of intuitive eating, plus a monthly Q&A podcast where you get to ask me any question you want and listen to hundreds of answers I've already given to other people so that you can work through your sticking points in intuitive eating and really put it into practice in your own life and troubleshoot those things that come up along the way. When you join, you'll also get access to our private Facebook group exclusively for course participants so that you can have real-time guidance from me and my team, as well as hundreds of other great people who are already on this intuitive eating path with you in the course. One of those people is a participant named Samantha Brown, who recently shared this on her public Facebook page in a post about resources to learn more about body positivity. She said, "A word on books about intuitive eating. I don't recommend them because intuitive eating has morphed too much into the realm of the wellness diet. I do practice intuitive eating and it has changed and healed my life, but I did it through Christy Harrison's Intuitive Eating Fundamentals online course. All of my other recommendations are free with internet access or library membership, but this is the one paid program I recommend because it is that good. And you get lifetime access to her ever-evolving materials." So I love getting feedback like that about the course, and it really is ever evolving because I'm about to release a big update to the materials, adding a lot more content since now I've been teaching this course for about 3 years. So in preparation for those updates, I'm going to be closing enrollment to the course in just 2 weeks from the time this episode airs. So now is really the best time to join the course. I've never closed enrollment before for this course in the whole 3 years I've been doing this, and finally it's time as we roll out these updates. So if you join now, not only will you get instant access to all the content that people are already loving, but you'll also be the first to get all the awesome new updates for free as soon as they're released. And the price of the course is going to increase once enrollment reopens to account for all that great new material we're adding. So if you get in now, you'll really get the best deal. If you're ready to break free from diet culture and reclaim the life it stole from you, learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. And now, without any further ado, let's go talk to Sofie Hagen. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
I mean, that is also really opening with the dark stuff, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the light stuff compared to what happens later? I don't know. But it was food. And so my mom is and was very poor, very working class. She was a single mother of 2 children, one of which was me. And I was deemed to be too fat and I think they said I was dangerously, they used the O word, of course, they didn't say fat. I was 8 and just a child, like there's nothing dangerous about my weight. When you see pictures today, I'm like, that was just how children look. And then my little sister, when she was born, there'd been some complications. So she was very, very, very tiny and very thin. So she was, they said, dangerously thin. So my mom, worked these 10 hours a day, super tired, super overworked, and kind of had to, in a way, choose Like she couldn't cook 2 whole meals, and the time she tried, then I would just eat my sister's meal and she would just run around and play and not eat anything. And I think food very quickly, because my mother just started hating food, like hating it, because it just meant this emotional, distressful situation between her and her children, and her relationship with being a mother. And then food just already had this negative thing that I had to eat this so-called healthy food, and it was dangerous, and it was a threat, and it all became about how I could cheat my mom into getting me food that I liked. I became like a little spy, just like counting sweets to make sure I could take the right amount without her noticing, and kind of trying to guilt her into giving me more sweets and candy on the weekend and stuff. And then at the same time as all of this was going on, I spent most of my time half my time with my grandparents, because my mom was a single mother, so she got help from them. And my grandfather is horrifically emotionally abusive. So he used food as a way of emotionally manipulate us a lot. So it would be, I think my best example is that he would place this huge cake, like a huge family-sized cake, in front of me. I'd be 6 years old, and he'd say, I bought this for you because I love you. And if you love me too, you'll eat the cake. And then he would place this magazine that had this picture of a fat woman, and he'd be like, but never look like that. And then I would sit and have to eat this. Yeah, it's really dark stuff. It's like the kind of stuff that whenever I tell all of the therapists I've had about it, they get goosebumps. He's not a nice man. So food became guilt, food became danger, food became something that I couldn't have and that I really wanted, because at the same time there were all these very negative emotions just in general, because, it's just a difficult childhood. So I wanted to, kill all the feelings with food. I wanted to numb it with food, and there was so much guilt with that, and so much danger, and so much negativity, and it functioned that it was purely emotional, and it was nothing to do with nutrition or joy or any of the things that I now know that food is and can be.
And it sounds like because it was so restricted and so dangerous, as you say, it was painted as this dangerous thing, it probably made you want, we all are born as intuitive eaters. We all are born with such an uncomplicated relationship with food. And it sounds like you were sort of trying to get back to that in a way, trying to get to a place where food could be love or could be just something that felt good.
Yeah, I don't even think I really knew that was a possibility, and I remember my earliest memory of having an intuition or an instinct about food. I must have been 4 or maybe 5. It's like a big deal that sometimes my grandfather would take me to the big freezer, and then he would allow me to choose an ice cream. And I remember one day looking into this huge freezer and then at all of the ice cream, and I said, oh, I don't actually feel like having an ice cream right now. And then he did this massive big sigh, and like, and then he just like retracted and went into this other room and just sat and stared out the window, like one tear rolling down his cheek. And my grandmother was immediately like, you have to make it up to him. You've made him very sad. You have to, oh God, you've made him sad. So I would hurry in and say, I want the ice cream. I want the ice cream. And then I finally got him to give me the ice cream again. And then he was happy. And I think that was the first time I remember actively squashing my intuition and my actual desires and boundaries and everything to do with food. That was how it was basically removed from my consciousness.
Oh God, that's heartbreaking.
I know, that's what I meant about starting with the dark stuff. This is it's grim stuff, isn't it?
It is. But I mean, it seems like it has later in life, it seems like you've come around to a place of being more at peace with food and more at peace with your body too. So
oh yeah, we're great now.
Yeah, that's incredible. I feel like that's such a testament to the resilience of human beings, that we can go through such darkness and have, like you said, your intuition with food just totally squashed, and your ability to set boundaries really with, I'm sure, other things than just food, but especially food too, and be able to come back to that later in life. That's a fucking miracle.
Yeah, it's one of the things I think about it a lot, especially recently. This is one of the stereotypes about fat people is often that we're weak, And I find that the more I, learn about it, the more I live as a fat person, the more I read about it and write about it, the more hilarious and weirdly ridiculous that seems to me. Because, I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be able to function a day as a fat person because it is so hard and it is so constant. And it is, it's hardcore stuff. Some of the comments we hear on a daily basis, not just from, people who are mean, but from friends and family and the media. There's no place where we can feel accepted and safe. So the things we've lived through as children, if we were fat when we were children, and the resilience is such an important word because, my God, weakness is the last thing a fat person has.
I totally agree. It's been just amazing to witness people in the fat acceptance movement sharing their stories and also working with clients. I mean, I myself have always had thin privilege. And like when I say that, a lot of people are like, how dare you? Being thin is not a privilege, And I've heard you talk about this on your podcast too, about how, the people sort of get up in arms about this. But the reality is that our society is geared to oppress fat people. Like that is the systemic oppression that you face in a fat body is just unbelievable. And yes, thinner people like have this internalized fat phobia as well. My friend Virgie Tovar, friend of the show.
Oh, she's amazing.
She's so amazing. Yeah. She has this amazing sort of way of framing it that I think is super helpful, where it's like there's the intrapersonal level of fat phobia that basically everyone living in diet culture has because we've been conditioned to fear fat and police it in ourselves. And so, yeah, like thin people have that too. Everyone on the weight spectrum basically has that. And then there's the interpersonal level, which is like between people, which is what you're talking about with your grandfather and like other people in your life, from doctors to family members to society at large, policing you. And some thin people experience that. If you have like a parent or caretaker with a disordered relationship with food in their body of their own, they can like foist that onto their child, even though the child is actually thin. And that's, a tragedy, but it's always a tragedy when people fat shame anyone. But then there's the third level, which is like the institutional level of fat phobia. And that's what only fat people face. That's like not being able to fit into airplane seats and not being able to find clothes in your size and having daily abuse hurled at you when you dare to just leave your house and walk down the street, like that stuff. And I feel like that's the part that people don't get when they sort of get defensive about the idea of thin privilege is like, yeah, we all have these sort of intrapersonal and to some extent interpersonal levels of fat phobia, but like the institutional level and just the oppressive nature of it from every faction of society is something that only fat people face. And that's where we have to start if we're going to dismantle fat phobia at the other levels too.
I'm nodding so much and no one can see it, but I'm just nodding along. It's so great. It's such a perfect definition of what it is. And I think I think it goes so deep in most people. I don't think I know anyone who has just a completely, I don't like to use the word healthy, but a non-destructive or non-toxic relationship with their bodies or with food, or so we're all struggling in some capacity. And I think it's very difficult to hear that maybe you're not the one who has it the worst, or maybe privilege and thin and all of these words and are so loaded because this goes so deep within everyone. And I get it. I totally understand. I understand it. Oh my God, I understand it. Like, because just in terms of talking about privilege in any other way, it's never nice to be called out on your privilege and to be made aware of the way you participate in oppressing people. But that's just part of the journey we have to go on in order to fix everything.
Yeah, the journey of social justice is an uncomfortable one in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and embrace it. That's I'm really I think we spend a lot of energy saying no. A lot of energy saying that no, I'm not privileged and I'm not racist and I'm not fatphobic and I'm not. And I think the only way we can really actually get through this is by going, we are all. We've all learned these things. We all encompass them in some way. We all do it in some way, and we can't fix that unless we acknowledge that we all have it. And I get this fear of saying it out loud. Of course, this is within me, but it's so important to acknowledge, and then that's how we can move on.
Absolutely. It's really powerful when we acknowledge that too, because it's like we're all in this together. Nobody is superior to anyone else. Nobody is looking down on someone else for it's like we all have a responsibility to help each other overcome this and come out of this. And we're all going to struggle and we're all going to stumble. And hopefully we can be there for each other and sort of push each other forward along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so going back to your story then, how did things unfold from there? I mean, it sounds like your relationship with food was very toxic from a very young age.
Yeah, it was. And that developed we then moved away from my grandfather when I was 10. And I think things started to get better. But then I think because we got away from him, then the healing starts, then the processing starts, and then it starts manifesting itself, and all whatever things happened, all the trauma then started becoming kind of part of my everyday. So I had a depression when I was 15, I think it started. At this point, I was overeating a lot. I don't even, now I feel like that might be a problematic term, is it? Binge eating? I feel like I read something about this. There might be another word that might be better. Well, it doesn't work calling yourself out if you don't know the answer, but
no, it's tricky. I mean, that's something that I've talked about too on the podcast is like, I don't love the term overeating because it's like over what eating? Like, over some like sort of mythical normal amount.
Yeah, but also I remember talking to people when I started realizing it was an eating disorder, because when I first brought it up, everyone I knew said, "Oh yeah, I overeat." So I didn't really think of it, but then I told them like exactly what I ate, and I could see their faces kind of drop. And for them, overeating was, "Oh my God, slices of pizza," and for me, I was like, "Pizzas," For me, it was eating until I couldn't physically move. I couldn't feel anything. I was so uncomfortable in my body that I was just more or less in physical pain, and that was it. Like that's how it's like it feels like a drug, you're like completely disconnected from existence, more or less, because you're numb, you've numbed yourself. So that was what it was, called it overeating, binge eating, whatever it was. It was eating so much that I couldn't feel. So I was doing that. I had depression. It was really bad. And when I was 16, I ended up very, very shortly in a psychiatric hospital because of the depression and the self-harm. It's all fun stuff. And I ended up talking my way out of it because I'm good at talking. It's now my job. So I was very good at I knew that I was going through things, but in my head I was like, yeah, but I'm like really good at this. So I was like, yeah, other people might be depressed, but I can fix it. Like I'm okay with it. My depression is like not the same. I don't know how I justified it to myself. And then I had a doctor look at me with really scared eyes and tell me that this was serious. And I was like, oh no, maybe it is. And I started seeing a therapist who was amazing. And I saw her on and off for like 8 years, more or less, for first 5 years. And then it was with big gaps in between. Through her, I stopped having that relationship with food. But she wasn't, like looking back, she wasn't fat positive, she was amazing and she fixed a lot of things, my current therapist says I'm not allowed to say fixed about psychology, and I see why, but I'm very much like it's fixed or it's broken kind of person. I remember saying, I hate my body, and she would say, well, there's this diet you could go on, which now we know is not how things work. And maybe she knows it now, it's 15 years ago, but she did teach me how to not listen to the voice in my head, the voice that says you are worthless, you are ugly, you are all of these things. She challenged it in a very good way. I've always been very attracted to like logic. So I would say, I'm just the worst person in the world. And she would say, oh yeah, what makes you so special? I was like, oh, that's good. That's so good. Like so you're the worst person, like the worst person. That's you? You won that? Like out of all the...
Right. Like how'd you get that trophy? Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, oh yeah, okay, maybe I'm all right. Yeah, maybe you're all right. I was like, yeah, fair enough. And all this logic of like, would you say that to your friend? Would you say that to yourself? Would you say that to a child? Would you, do you think that you a year ago was this thing? And all of this, imagine there's a technique behind it. Cognitive therapy, maybe?
Yeah. Sounds like cognitive therapy and self-compassion too, which is huge.
Yeah, it's really just, therapy is amazing. And sometimes it's super complicated. Sometimes it's super painful. But sometimes it's so simple. Sometimes it's just someone saying, I think one of my biggest breakthroughs in therapy was when someone just said, wow, that sounds like it was really hard. And I just had this, 4-day cry of like, oh my God, yeah, it was actually. That's so simple. Like my friend could in theory have said that, and it was just more expensive than a friend.
Right. And like friends almost don't say that. I feel like friends are so, because we all live in this society that's so conditioned to be like, no, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. And like sort of look for the positive, that like a therapist giving you permission to say, yeah, that was hard. And for me too, like therapy has been such a huge part of my life and my healing my own relationship with food and just like everything else, being able to learn how to set boundaries and relationships and all of that good stuff. Just having a therapist sort of give me permission to feel bad about something and be like, no, you don't have to defend your family to me. Like actually what your whatever family member did was kind of fucked up and you have a right to feel hurt about it. It would just be like, yeah, the floodgates would open. I'm like,
It's amazing. I've sat, I love therapy. I could talk about it for hours, but I love the being called on your, did you say I could swear?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. Being called on your bullshit is amazing. When you're like, oh, my friend is really struggling. And my therapist was like, she just set the number for a helpline. And I was like, oh, good. That's really good to know. Thank you. So anyways, he's really struggling. And she'd say the number again. I'd be like, okay. So he's having a hard time. She just kept saying the number. And I was like, oh, I see what you're doing. Okay, so it's not about I shouldn't try and fix, and it's about me. Okay, fair enough. I can't save the world. Okay, I get it. I love it. I love it so much.
Oh, that's so good. I know. I love being called on my bullshit. It's so helpful and also so painful. Like sometimes
it's so
just
painful.
Like, ugh, I don't want to hear it. I hate this.
Yeah, I mean, my previous one, I've now had quite a few. Now I have 2 actually. It's very exciting. But my previous one, she I kind of sensed that she wanted me to cry. So in my head, it became a competition. I was like, "You're not getting me. You're not getting me to cry." And then at one point, she kept saying something, and I could feel it was almost working. And then I managed to think of something else. So I just loudly said, "Ha ha! I won!" And she was like, "What?" I was like, "Oh yeah, sorry, yeah." And yeah, she had a good point. Maybe that wasn't the most helpful for my process, but it felt really good for my ego. She didn't win.
Yeah, the competition of like, I will not cry. It's so funny. I always think of like Good Will Hunting. Do you know the scene in Good Will Hunting where like the therapist is like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And like he finally breaks down. Like I always, when my therapist would say anything in regards to that, I'd be, or, sort of in that general vein, I'd be like, you're doing the Good Will Hunting thing on me, aren't you?
Yeah, you're doing the Robin Williams thing. But to be fair, I've used that with a friend who was having a hard time because I didn't know what to say. It was a really, I couldn't even get into the situation because it's so real. But she was, and you know what? It wasn't her fault. But I didn't know what to say because she was a mess and it was just the most complicated situation. So I just started saying, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And it worked. And I don't think she's ever watched the film because she's still talking about it as if I invented that phrase. Like, oh, remember when you just said the right thing at the right time and it really helped me a lot. And I was just like, please never watch that film. Please never watch that film.
That's amazing. That's a good little pro tip for anyone like, I have a lot of therapists who listen to the podcast actually. Just like, throw out a little Robin Williams Good Will Hunting vibe and that might help some people.
But you know what? There's a reason, because this gets big picture stuff now, but I believe that the reason we keep being oppressed and the reason we keep being held in this capitalist hellhole of a bubble of self-hatred and diet culture and fatphobia and all of this is because of the self-blame. And not just in the, because diet speak is often, you can do this with willpower, meaning if you failed, you didn't do it good enough. You failed. It's your fault. You failed. If you then lose weight, then we won because we did the right thing, right? And then at the same time, it's all about blame. Fat people are doing this to the health system and fat people are doing this and fat people could be thin if they wanted to, but they're just too lazy. And it's all like blame, blame, blame. So I get that people think it is my fault. But then we now have body positivity, which in many ways is a great thing. I'm not, of course it does good things, but body positivity is also love yourself. And that is really, really difficult. And also not something I can necessarily do or control. And also it shouldn't be my responsibility because there's so much focus now on being good at loving yourself. And now it's almost like, oh, I was bad at losing weight and now I'm bad at loving myself.
Yes.
it's just another way of blaming ourselves for something we can't achieve, when actually at no point do we look behind the messages that are being sold to children before the children even have Instagram so they can look at all these body positivity accounts. They grow up knowing that they're worthless, and then we can start fixing them and fixing each other and fixing ourselves without ever holding the right people accountable. There are actual people, like real life physical human beings with names and lives and families, who are going into offices going, right, how do we fuck up children? How do we make children feel so worthless that in 5 to 10 years they will give us all of their money? And
it's so fucked.
So what I'm trying to say is, it's not our fault.
Yes. It's so true. I mean, I think that's a really wonderful point, that like body positivity is just operating under the same personal responsibility framework as diet culture is and the diet industry is already. And like, I mean, that goes back to so much of like Anglo-European sort of culture in general, I think, too. And, you know, especially I feel like the US was kind of where diet culture was born to some extent, like really in sort of as an industry, and then exported. But there's also like so much personal responsibility woven into, I think, the way that like people think about politics or any sort of social justice issue. I think in a lot of the Western world, you know, it's like you need to, if you're not being taken seriously in the workplace, if you're not, you know, if you're being catcalled or whatever, like it's your responsibility to shut it down or something, instead of
what were you wearing, and hashtag
right.
lean in, and we fix this by you fixing you, and not, you know, the system. It's how they thrive, and they thrive so well. You know, it's poverty, as we know, is like one of the most undercurrent in every single system of oppression is this poverty. And even that, the language around poverty, you know, it's, oh, just get a better job, just work harder, just, you know, you're getting benefits from the system because you're lazy. You know, there's so much blame and homelessness. And in every situation, there will be a million people saying, well, okay, that's clearly me being from Denmark, where a million people is a lot. In America, that's like the neighborhood.
Drop in the bucket, yeah.
A lot of people will be saying it's their fault. And that is how basically no one blames the system. And that's how the patriarchal capitalist system thrives, because no one ever points to them. And it's so clever. It's a great business model, but my God, it's killing people.
It is. It's killing people, and it's time for it to end, you know? And I think that's what, I mean, your work and my work and everyone in this like fat acceptance, body liberation space is really trying to highlight, is like that it isn't your fault. It is the system. And it has to go beyond just body positivity, love your body, which like, I mean, I'd love to talk about your journey with that too, because I know like loving your own body as an individual, I think, is like an important prerequisite. And I know you say that too, that has a place in this healing, but it's not all of it. It can't be all of it, because why the fuck did we think our bodies were wrong in the first place? Why did we not love our bodies in the first place? That's the real problem. You know, we were not born hating our bodies. Somebody told us to hate our bodies. Actually, many somebodies along the way told us to hate our bodies. And that's the problem.
Yes, absolutely. I think for me, I mean, I don't know. I've never been part of, I mean, of course I cater to body positivity often because my work, I'm a comedian, you know, that is the main thing I do. And my work isn't academic or anything like that. So, and I have Instagram, I've used nice filters, and I put up pictures of myself, and I say things like, love your body and stuff, you know. So I'm part of it in a way, but I don't think my whole life, I was always taught to severely disrespect authority. Not even to not respect authority, just to, like, don't trust it, don't like it, fight it. I spoke to my mother recently about, because it made so much mess in school. I just always got into trouble because I was trying to change the rules or challenge the system or whatever. And I said it to her recently. I said, I'm just so happy that whenever they called you and said I'd done something, you were just always on my side. Didn't matter how fucked up a thing I'd done. And she said, yeah, well, of course, I couldn't raise you to be someone who liked authority. I was like, that's amazing.
That's so great.
I see where I get it from.
What a gift.
That's always been my thing, you know, like tiny things. Like when I was, 7, I protested against the fact that we had to go outside for half an hour every day at school. So I was like, and I had all these logical things like, what is outside? That's just like, there's nothing out there that can teach us anything. Well, inside are books. So I made a huge thing. I created like a sit-in for people. I mean, I must have been just like the most annoying, annoying child. I tried to get maths erased from the schedule. I had all sorts of reasons for that. I was like, calculators, boom. we don't need to learn this. That one didn't work. I did manage to get out of PE, which is very mandatory, which was, I mean, a very long struggle. So I would always, try to get certain teachers fired who were horrible. The teacher threw scissors at me. I was like, that should get her kicked out.
Yeah, big time.
So that was always my thing. I was always very much someone who just kept trying to. I wanted everything to be very fair, and nothing seemed to be fair. And also, no one seemed to be fighting it. I would point out these things like, this is an unfair situation. Something bad is happening. We should do something. We have rights. And people would just kind of shrug. And it would always annoy me that people didn't have the same need to ruin things, basically, or fix things, depending on who you ask.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I hated my body. I tried to lose weight. For what? 12, 14 years or so was probably like a new diet every week or every third week or every second month or however long these diets gave the illusion of working. And it just, of course they work for a couple of weeks and then you lose the weight and then you gain even more back. So
and then you blame yourself for gaining the weight back instead of blaming the diet, instead of sort of zooming out and realizing, oh, that's part of the whole way that it doesn't actually work and therefore keeps you coming back for more. Like it looks like it's working. And so then you blame yourself when it stops, quote unquote, working. But actually that was always part of the system. It was always designed to fail after a certain period of time.
I quite like saying it. I quite like saying, oh, I have lost so much weight. I have lost so much weight. Because people, if they don't know me, their reaction is to go, oh, congratulations. I'm like, no. Like over the years, I've lost whatever pounds there. I've lost whatever pounds there. If you put all that together, that's a lot. But then also I gained all of it back plus more. And that's weird because that is how diets work. So in a way, they do work because they're designed to make you fatter. People just don't know that.
They work, exactly. They work for the benefit of the industry, for the system that created it, like to keep you coming back for more and thinking that you have an even bigger and bigger problem, quote unquote, every time you gain back more weight. So then better get to the next diet, better do the next thing. Ugh.
It's genius. It's such a good business model. If you had no heart, no soul, no empathy, it's brilliant.
Yeah, and that's who created it, really. Sociopaths. Yeah.
Exactly, and they're so rich. So when I went to university, which I just started doing stand-up, I was 21, I think. And I had decided that I wanted to study Russian. I mean, I don't know why I thought that was ever going to work out, but I did. And then and also I'd already tried studying to be like 10 other things, because the thing about Denmark is you get money to go to school, so it's like a salary. So I know. I didn't have to say it, but I just brought it in there because I was like, hello, America.
Hello, America. You should know.
It's really pretty great. So that was like my 6th attempt at getting an education. And it was I was already doing comedy, and there had been this huge TV show, gala comedy show in Denmark the night before, where I'd been the presenter on this TV show. So I was wearing this ball gown, fell asleep, drunk, woke up, realized I had to get to university on the first day of school. So I arrived still drunk, with mascara down my cheeks and this ball gown and like torn tights. And I don't know how it must have looked so strange. I must have looked like I was either taking it too seriously or not seriously at all.
Mm-hmm. Like this was an intentional look. Like
yeah, exactly. And everyone else was, nervous because the first day of school, and I was just sitting there like burping. But then I found like one other person who looked like they weren't part of a weird, white blonde thin cult. And it was Andrea Storgård-Borch, and she was just like amazing, hairy armpits. She had a mullet. It's brilliant. And I sat down next to her, we started talking, and she was at this point a very radical, cool body activist.
Oh, wow.
And full on, anti-capitalist work. And she was already doing a lot of work. And she also didn't really want to study Russian. And I knew nothing at this point. I just knew that fat was bad and you should lose weight and be thin. And that's the only right way to be. And that's just a fact. And I was doing jokes on stage about, how I'm fat and lazy and all of that stuff. And she just immediately realized that she was dealing with someone who was fat and who didn't know that wasn't okay, and someone who was also spreading this rhetoric all over comedy stages because I didn't know better. So she just gave me an education. Just instead of us learning Russian, she was just telling me about the basics, like what is feminism, what is capitalism, what is diet culture. And it blew my mind. I had never, but one thing is that it blew my mind, but it just fit in with this core of me that had always wanted things to be fair and just and logic. Because it is so logic. You feel bad, you buy things, people make money. That's why you feel bad, because they make you feel bad. It's so simple and it makes so much sense. And it had to be dismantled. Like, that has to not be a thing anymore. So it was overnight. Like, the next morning I woke up, everything had changed. Like, the way I saw my body, the way I saw bodies in general, the way I looked at adverts, and it felt like I could suddenly speak a new language, because before that, when people said, "Oh my God, have you lost weight?" I would hear that as a fact, like a fact that, yes, that is a good thing. And then suddenly when someone said that, I could hear decades of internalized hatred of a body type that wasn't objectively bad. And that that started everything. So, and that's what I mean by not being part of body positivity, because that was my way in.
It was like radical.
Super radical. It was already activism. It was fat liberation from the beginning. So body positivity just never really became, I don't know, most people probably find body positivity and use it as like a leeway to maybe get into fat liberation. But for me, it was from the beginning, it was just the fight and the destroy this system and become aware of the system, and then that way try and affect change. Which is why people will often ask me how do I love my body? And I always feel a bit guilty about, I don't think my answer necessarily will work for everyone, because I know that a lot of people don't get like a psychopathic, lusty look in their eyes when they hear about social injustice, which I had from the age of 3. And I know that's not necessarily what people want to hear, but that is what worked for me. It was like a light bulb moment. There was no process. It's not like I loved my body from one day to the other, but I believed that it was worth something from one day to the other.
That's amazing. And it sounds like it really plugged into your existing social justice framework, which does make it so much easier, I think. Not that it's easy to navigate still the internalized body hatred or the stuff that you have to, that you get hurled at you every day as a fat person navigating the world, but it sounds like you had a sort of resilience to it from the start because of that social justice lens.
Yeah, I think so. And I think people's indifference has, for me, always been the worst thing. I mean, that all the trolling, and there's a lot, doesn't affect me emotionally at all. And people being just disagreeing, that's annoying, but it doesn't affect me. But people knowing these things and then actively just deciding to not care, that has always been what just, I don't know, it hurts somewhere I can't even describe where it is, because it's so easy, I think. It's so, how can you not be passionate? How can you not want to? And it's not even about judging it. It's just this, I just don't understand it. I just don't understand how you don't want to destroy this. Because if we all got together and did something, my God, the world would be amazing. But it's the complicitness of people just, I find it now, with I've written this book and it's not published yet. It comes out at the beginning of May, but we're just at this current time, a month and a half away. So I have no idea what date it is.
Something like that.
It's a while back. But now, people in my life are starting to read it, and people who have, no one would ever admit to me that they were dieting because they know me well enough to know that. But, I have people who are like, oh, I'll just have the chicken but not have the potatoes because I'm allergic. Like, yeah, right.
Sure.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
whatever. But people like that, I'm like, yeah, sure, but maybe they don't know yet. They haven't, and I'm not saying like my book will change lives, but
I'm sure it will, honestly. But like,
I would like to, I'd hope it would do something good, but if my book could change everyone, that would be quite magical, actually. But
incredible.
But I would hope that once people in my life read it, that they would then,
yeah.
That's a disregarding of it. The people saying, oh, I can't deal with that. That's too complex. Or that's too, I can't. Indifference is so, it makes it so uncomfortable, because we're just accepting. Are we just going to accept this? Are we just going to accept one thing is accepting bad things that happens to you. That can be so many reasons why you feel okay with that, because you've not learned your worth more, because of trauma, because of whatever. But I often get emails from children, children who go to school, they have a project about body stuff. And I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes they take the piss. And sometimes they're like, what is body positivity? I'm like, mate, you have Google, come on, please. But sometimes there's these like 10-year-old girls being like, oh, we're 10 years old and we hate our bodies. How should we love our bodies? And like, you're 10 years old and you hate your body. Oh my God. And one thing is being indifferent to your own oppression, but I mean, now I'm like the classic, like, think of the children. But genuinely, think of the children.
Yeah, it does. It does matter. There's something so sad about that.
Yeah.
And being indifferent to that is just so painful. I mean, I think it is. I think about that a lot too, because there's definitely people that I know who are also pretty indifferent to this stuff, or like, that's nice for you to do this work, but I'm going to go ahead and do my whole 30 over here, who just don't take it in. And I think it's partly privilege and benefiting from the system, maybe. Also, in addition to trauma and oppression, of course, like it's a different mix for different people. But I think there's the people that think, well, dieting's working for me. And, it's making me quote unquote healthier or whatever. There's these little things that you can, because it's gotten so insidious. I think diet culture has really shape-shifted and gone underground in the 21st century. And I talk about this a lot, where like now it's about quote unquote wellness, and I call it the wellness diet. Diet culture's new guise for the new millennium, where everybody kind of knows that like diets don't work, quote unquote diets. Like, oh, I'm not dieting. It's a lifestyle change. I'm not dieting. It's wellness,
Yeah, it's health. It's always health. Mm-hmm. It's just because I want to feel healthy. How does healthy feel? Go away.
Go away.
It's just the health glorification, I think, is scary for many reasons. But first of all, because it has nothing to do with weight at all. But also just, I mean, I did a lot of, basically, my book is like, it's a bit memoir, it's a bit of not self-help, but like I give advice, like actual practical advice, like what you can do to get a better relationship with your body. But it's also, what I wanted it to be was also just like this angry, kind of, I don't even know what the word would be, but
manifesto kind of.
A lot of things had to get cut because it was two big topics. So one of the things that had to get cut because it was just me shouting a lot, because I just realized it was the connotations maybe between the echoes between the rhetoric we have now about health and the glorification of health, and how much that echoes the way Hitler talked about health. And I know it's like a classic move to go, Hitler, but that's literally what he was doing. It's eugenics. It's the idea that healthy people are more worthy, are better, are morally better, are the right people, and the people who deserve to live and who deserve to be treated well. Like that's where we're heading now, and that is terrifying. That is proper terrifying.
It is. That's a really great point. And I don't think I've seen anyone speak or write about that connection in quite that way. Definitely, I've seen people talk about eugenics in sort of like the history of diet culture. And I'm writing a book myself now and talking about the history of diet culture a little bit, and touched on that a bit, but not in the way of Hitler's actual rhetoric about eugenics and how that is paralleling what's going on today with wellness. So maybe that's an article or something you can do separately from the book or something, but I feel like that needs to be brought out.
I think it was Kevin Bay Kevin Bay was my researcher for the book, because he's so clever.
Oh yeah,
he's
amazing.
So clever. And it was a lot of him sending me a lot of stuff and me saying, right, but can you explain that to me as if I'm 5 years old? And I think it was probably him who mentioned it, because he knows everything. So I can't take credit for the thinking, but I think that was Kevin. So I'm sure there must be something, but we need it to be out there. We need it to be, because so much of this, the first book about why fat is necessarily unhealthy was it the 80s, the 70s or something? And we're not saying anything new. They are not saying anything new to try and contradict it. It's just no one is putting it out in the public eye, so that it's not common knowledge, even though it's been, we've had this discussion for decades. We're right.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, I feel like it's this sort of still like progressive underground thing that people, even not everybody on the left knows about it, because now we have, as my friend of the pod, Melissa Toller, has said, we had a whole episode about fatphobia and woke spaces and how, you can have the most woke people talking about Black Lives Matter and social justice and all these other important ideas, and yet they're still like, oh, but quote unquote obesity is bad. Oh, we have an obesity epidemic. We need to stop people being fat, basically. And the disconnect there is so difficult to handle, because it's like, oh, but these are people who should get it, and the health rhetoric, the wellness rhetoric, the Michael Pollan, only eat plants, don't eat processed food, all that stuff, I think has really clouded what could have been sort of a clear message of liberation that people who are already progressive minded could have easily gotten on board with if it had gotten out in a bigger way.
Yeah, and it's the reason why some people say mistakenly this thing of, oh, it's the one last thing that people are allowed to say something negative, which of course isn't true, and something you would primarily say if you're
white.
Exactly, yeah, if you're white and if everything
and
else is
able-bodied and all that. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Because I never hear anything bad about. No, of course you don't, because you're not part of it. Oh, anyways, but I can see where the logic, where people think the logic stems from, because you can watch a TV show that's being praised by everyone. Everyone's like, watch this new TV show. It's amazing and it's diverse and it's blah blah blah. It talks about the important topics. It's not sexist, and you're like, oh my god, I can't wait to watch it. And then the first scene is, it could literally be a fat person falling over and the main character laughing, saying, you are disgusting. And people just don't even notice it. And you're like, wow. So none of you thought to mention this, and none of you brought this up, that this was a huge problem. It's so hurtful because often it's not even necessary. It's not even a necessary thing to, it's people just cannot figure out a way of, the worst one I had was I'm often asked to audition for roles which are, not anymore, because now I've been quite loud about my opinions about these sorts of things, and now, the offers have stopped coming in. But I was asked to play, so the joke was a sketch for Danish TV, and Denmark is horrifically behind when it comes to a lot of things like this. So it was to play a fat woman who was a spinning instructor, like a bike, whatever. And the joke was that she was very unintelligent. So it was a monologue to camera, and I had to say things like, I just don't understand why I'm not losing weight, because I only eat bad foods on days that end with day or whatever. So it's just yeah. But the whole point was her wanting to date, and she couldn't find a boyfriend. And it was all horrific. And then I messaged the writers, and I was like, this is the worst thing I've ever read. You cannot put this out. This is so ridiculous. And I was and they were trying to suggest changes. I was like, there's no way you can't
say this. Yeah, no.
But one of their suggestions where they said, oh, but we need a fat woman to play the part, because it's about a woman who can't get a boyfriend. And if it was a thin actress, then no one would believe it.
Oh my God.
I was like, I was so like, what? Wow. It's like, you can't imagine a thin person who can't get a part. You can't imagine a fat person who can get it. You can't even imagine. It's a fictional sketch.
Wow. Yeah, seriously, just make it up. You made up the whole thing anyway. Yeah,
I wouldn't want to watch Lord of the Rings with you if you're that hung up on what you believe and not believe it to be real. It's so you feel. But that's the thing about TV. It's almost like, well, you can't have a TV show without having a joke. That's something about fat.
It's such cheap comedy too. It's not creative. It's not thoughtful. I feel like there's so much more people pushing the envelope on comedy in so many other ways. But with that, it's just this easy, cheap laugh that people go for because of all the, because there is no concerted, larger scale movement to make discrimination against fat people be seen as the terrible thing that it is, and so people are like, oh no, this is fine, this group we can punch down here, right? Or not, it's not even considered punching down, it's just not even considered at all.
Yeah, exactly. The whole and I am sure you absolutely hate people mentioning this guy, but what I hate the most about fatphobic people who think they're left wing and liberal minded, they can be as good as they think they are, and then they go, oh, Trump is fat. And you're like, yeah. Of all the things that man is, really, fat is the one you want to?
Right.
Yeah, he's a dictator. He's a Nazi. He's a mass murderer. He's like the worst person in the world. I mean, he's not, but there's a lot of people. But he's like one of the worst things to have happened to this world. But his fat is somehow what you're going to point out. Like, that's still the most obvious bad thing that you can point out. And what I hate the most about these people is that they're making me defend Trump. That is the worst decision. I don't want to do that. Just stop calling the man fat. I mean,
yeah, like make it exactly. That's exactly how I feel too. I feel like I've defended him in conversations with people that I'm like, why are we talking about this? Why are we even having to have this conversation? I don't want to have to defend him in any way, shape, or form. But like, fat phobia is not okay no matter what, and if you're going to say something fat phobic about him, then I guess I better defend him. Ugh.
And also, he doesn't care. Like, he doesn't care. He runs the entire world. Well, I don't know if he is rich. I think there's a
right.
He's supposedly rich. He's probably got more money than me. But either way, he seems to not care about anything. So of course, you calling him fat. What's that? You know what that's going to do? That's going to make all of your fat friends very sad. It's going to probably make some of your thin friends who think they're fat sad. It's going to make children sad. It's gonna. Yeah,
it's hurting everyone but him. Basically, it's hurting the people who we should not be hurting.
Yeah, and it also makes it. I mean, let's not try and make it sound like fat is somehow worse than being a Nazi.
Right.
Point that out instead. I mean, he's also got silly hair and whatever, but also. You're ruining the world. So maybe point that out as the worst thing about him.
That's probably the thing we should focus on. Like, not his body. It's just, it's the worst.
It's so tiring. It's such tiring work. And it's because it often gets so close, fat phobia is something, I guess it is maybe because it does affect everyone. You can kind of avoid talking about, if your whole family is white, you can sort of go your whole life without discussing race because it doesn't need to affect you. There are people who just never even think about it because that's just not in their world because they've made some decisions about it, whatever. But everyone has a direct relationship with fatness because we all have fat on our bodies. It doesn't matter how thin you are, you will have something. And everyone eats. So it's just something that somehow affects all of us. So we sometimes have to fight that from like this hugely personal thing for everyone and make it about rights, make it about privilege, make it about rhetoric. And it feels like such a difficult thing to do because I think maybe the case is that no one is indifferent. Maybe that's the problem, is that no one is indifferent because everyone has a relationship with it that we first have to conquer before they will even listen.
Right. And they've all internalized so many beliefs from diet culture and there's so many different flavors of dieting now that, including those like diets that say they're not diets and that are just about quote unquote health and wellness. And everybody has their pet thing. It's like, well, intermittent fasting works for me and I've seen the research. There's copious, and P.S., like there's not copious research on it. There's like 1 year worth of research, but like people have, they'll just dig in so hard to something that is just the latest fad diet and not be able to be dissuaded from that. And if you talk to them about that, it is so personal, because it's like, this is how I've chosen to like organize my days. This is how I've chosen to eat multiple times a day. This is how I've chosen to sort of like proselytize to my family, or maybe I've brought my kids into it. It's like, it's very, very personal, and getting through that. I mean, getting to like the deeper part about liberation, I think requires getting through this stuff that people are so defensive about because it feels so personal, almost like talking to them about their relationship with like money or sex, or, there's these other sort of taboo topics that are so personal. And I feel like food and dieting and exercise are kind of going in that direction where it's like, don't even talk to me about my diet, like, how dare you?
Well, you must have heard of Jess Baker's body currency theory? Mm-hmm. I think that always sums it up so perfectly. I mean, it does now I've said it out loud so many times, I've probably butchered it completely. Just this idea that we know how much time and money and emotion and how much we've invested in becoming thin, that it's almost like we have a subconscious idea of like an amount of money that we've spent on this. So when someone comes along and is just happy and fat, that's what they thought they were trying to buy. And then it's almost like you're saying to them, your money is worthless. You know, the currency doesn't work. It's just all your savings that you've saved up for decades has now no value.
Right.
So I think it's, I mean, I probably rewrote that theory completely. I'm sorry, Jess.
No, it's, yeah, sounds pretty close to what she says. And also, yeah, it is, I mean, that's it, right? It's like people have invested time, money, energy. They've lost years of their lives. They've lost health in the pursuit of thinness. And all of that, like investing that much in something, I don't care what it is, you know, if you think about like investing in some sort of business or like gambling where you're like, I'm going to double down. I'm putting it all on, you know, whatever to win. Yeah, I think that there's such emotion behind that. And it's hard to dissuade someone when they've really invested that much in something to say like, I'm sorry, but like the whole premise of this is flawed, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, how dare you?
And then there's also what I find difficult is, and you must have had the same thing, when you tell someone that diets don't work and that the size you are now is probably the size you will always be, you know, maybe this is it. Like, and even if you are one of the 0. whatever percent who for some reason lose weight for whatever, still you're alive right now, and you would still be happier right now if you liked yourself and if you ate what you wanted to eat, you know. But telling people that you will never be thin, there's a big chance, big risk, however you want to look at it, that you will never, ever be thin. I don't think people can. The study is about, you know, there was a study where they asked previously fat people, so people who had, I'm just going to say temporarily lost weight. Mm-hmm. They asked them all, would you rather be, how was it? Would you rather be fat again and a millionaire? Or something like that. And like, no one ever wanted to be fat again. There's the one where they had to choose between being fat or losing a leg or having permanent painful acne, or it was like losing 10 years of your life. And people always chose whatever isn't the fat thing. And a lot of fat people just don't exist in their bodies because we're just like, right, but this is temporary. This is not now, but in next summer, I'm going to be thin, and then I'll wear a bikini. Then I'll ask that boy out. Then I'll go to that party. Then I'll hang out with my friends. Then I will take up dancing. Then I'll go traveling. Then I'll start writing poetry. But as of now, I'm just going to eat these carrots in the dark and hate myself because this isn't me. And that is so dangerous.
Oh my God, yes. That loss of life, really, that putting years on hold in the pursuit of something that is not real. It's interesting, you know, when we talk about the parallels with money, because I think about how there's like a theory, and I've read a couple of think pieces about this. I don't know where, but, you know, sort of back when Trump was first elected, everybody was like, how did this happen? You know, and it's like, well, racism, number one, but also like, how did people see this terrible guy, even like racism aside, just like the stuff he says, his bearing, his way of like moving through the world. He seems like a genuine asshole. Like, why did people fall for this? And, you know, nobody before would have dreamed that someone like that could be like presidential. And there's this idea that him being the sort of quote unquote rich guy, which, yeah, again, we don't know that to be true really, but like, you know, being the sort of symbol of richness and doing things to promote other rich people, being like, I'm going to create tax cuts for the rich, basically. Middle class and lower middle class people don't see that as a personal affront or as something that's out of line with their interests, because it's like, well, I'm going to be rich one day. Like, I'm aspiring to that. So like, if he's doing tax cuts for the rich, that's great because that affects my future self. There is a genuine, you know, there's research showing that people like even in the poor phase in their life, like think that one day, on average, I guess, I'm sure this is different in different communities, but like think that one day they could be rich. And so they're aspiring to that and allowing policies to happen that favor the rich because of that. And I feel like that's a similar thing to this idea of believing that you're going to be thin one day and, allowing oppression of fat people to exist. Because it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, thin privilege is what I'm aspiring to. That's what I'm going to get to one day. And so I want that. I want those riches that are promised to me when I'm thin, like that adulation and the success and the love and the money and all of it that's going to come with that. That's what I'm striving for.
That is so interesting because this for me, this is a very like in my own little head, in my own life thing, something just came completely full circle. Because when I was 12, and we started learning about America, the US at school, I remember the question, like people would, the teacher would teach us about the US and the American dream and this thing that all the children would be taught, one day you can be president. And it was, we were all just losing our minds. We're like, what? And also they have to pay to go to school, but that surely creates, then the poor people will stay poor and uneducated and the rich people will just get, that doesn't make sense. It blew our minds that could happen. And we all had this, and the question was asked, what happens when you tell a whole country that they can all be special, they can all be president. And I was in my head, I was like, oh my God, we just found out.
Yes.
We just found the answer to that. Because Denmark, now all of Europe is going down this right-wing, horrible hellhole. But at this point, Denmark was still Denmark's still socialist compared to most countries, well, a lot of countries. And back then, that, the people, the attitude towards taxes has always been positive. People are kind of proudly paying their 50% to tax because we kind of know it benefits everyone and we know it makes the country good. And so for us, that attitude was so strange that why would you tell? It's not statistically possible. But
No.
I just had this moment of like, wow, that question someone asked me a hypothetical question that someone asked me when I was 11 has just been answered, and it's terrifying.
Oh, yes. Oh my God. It is. And I think that's like so much of what capitalism and diet culture are predicated upon is this idea that like everybody is special, the statistical impossibility that like we're all above average or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's why when you say to people like, do you know 95% or more of diets fail? We have the research. There's decades of research showing that give or take 90% fail, and you're going to gain back all the weight you lost, and 2/3 of the time, usually it's more. So really the odds are not in your favor. But I think a lot of people hold on to this idea not through any fault of their own, again, going back to the, like, it's not your fault, but it's like they've been conditioned to think through diet culture and through this sort of American culture, at least, of like, everybody is above average, that they're like, well, I'll be that 5% that does lose weight and keep it off. Like, I'll be that, third that doesn't gain back more or whatever.
That's interesting because that mentality is the same in countries that don't have that, like for example, Denmark, that's, diet culture still think, but I think it's, anyone who's ever been on a diet will know the adrenaline of that first day or the day before the first day of a diet when you are, you're imagining how you will look and how your life's going to be and what you will wear and what you will do when you're finally thin in a few months or in a year, however much you need to lose, blah, 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 blah. And the adrenaline of like planning and throwing out, you're so motivated and you're throwing out all of the stuff and you're putting soap on the brownies in the bin and you feel like this is it. I'm going to be happy now. I am going to be happy and I have a recipe for happiness. I just have to follow it. That's all I have to do. That can't be hard. Like all I have to do is just eat certain things. That's so possible. Like right now I could eat a salad and I'd be happy. So why would that be difficult in a week? So, and I know for my own life, I was high on that. Oh, that Sunday before the Monday when a new diet started. Oh my God. It was like, now I have happiness. I have a recipe. I have a guide to it. And I think that makes you that high and that belief, because that's what they tell you, that you can do this. And there's all these before and after photos and all the billboards and, you hear stories and it's just this. I think the hope that a diet gives you, the promise it gives you, is so intoxicating that, I mean, imagine someone just saying, follow these 3 steps and you'll be happy. And the 3 steps aren't, confront your childhood trauma, which is like, whoa, no, thank you. It's like, eat a carrot and you will live longer. It's so easy. They make it sound so much fun and easy. The diets that are like, you can eat whatever you want and still lose weight. And people are just like, oh my God, finally.
Great.
Without thinking about that. Of course, that's not.
Right.
Because that's never going to be true. Come on. So I think the promise and this like idea that one day, and you can calculate it. They'll say you can lose blah blah a week, so you can calculate like right by July I'm gonna look like this. Wow, and get new clothes and I'll get boyfriends and I'll get some reason also get money. I don't know why, but in my fantasy I have more money when I'm thin.
Right.
Which also statistically you would get paid more as a thin person.
True. Exactly.
But I think that is one of the big. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I've not met that many people who know that diets don't work. I mean, I think people just block it out of their heads, like, shh, no. Because then Weight Watchers or whatever will come out and say, it always works,
Yeah, we've got the research.
I'm so tired of people using research. I'm so tired of people saying, according to science, like, you've never read a fucking journal in your fucking life.
Totally.
These trolls that come out from like, actually, it's a fact. And like, you don't, as if I've not looked this up, right? Like, as if I've written a book and done, I don't know how many shows and posts, as if I've not been in the fat activism community in one way or the other for 7 years. You think it never occurred to me to double check if these statistics weren't based on facts? Like, it's so, people are so convinced. And one thing is convinced that something isn't pretty. I mean, even the worst, most unintelligent person will be able to see that not everyone thinks the same things are pretty. But when people think it's science and people think it's a fact, it feels so impossible to fight.
Yeah, it does. And especially when like the interpretations of science are so skewed by the lens of diet culture. Like, because I mean, if you read, it's so funny to read studies and to see where it's like opinion. Okay, here's the actual research, opinion. Like the structure of it is like most of it is actually opinion. And then there's the actual results section is where you might find some interesting findings or something that shows, has some result one way or another, but like the way that they interpret it is always through this lens of diet culture, or, not 99% of the time probably, because there are great health at every size researchers out there who are doing research and then interpreting it through the lens of like weight neutral, weight inclusive paradigms. But like for the most part, it's people being like, the obesity epidemic is the worst thing in the world. And so here's what our study looked at is like how to make fat people thinner. And we did this by putting them on this diet for 3 weeks or whatever, and then look at the benefits. And then the opinion at the end is like, and that means that every fat person will lose weight on this diet, and like, it's just these leaps that scientific researchers make. And then the journalists who write articles about it based on just a press release, not even reading the frickin' study, and then disseminating it to the public. And then people are like, well, it's science. And it's like, where did you read that? Did you read that in the Journal of Eating Disorders? No, I read it in USA Today. It's like, fuck you. Like,
I'm trying to remember. There's a very specific study that was just so, I mean, everything you just said, it was just, oh God, what was it called? Fogle?
Oh, yes.
Do you know which one I mean?
Flagel, is it the one where she was talking about how like being quote unquote overweight or obese actually doesn't shorten your life, or no?
I mean, the thing is, there are so many studies that there could be so many. No, this was in. Oh, let me just check because I have it here. It's very, very, very good. Yes. Oh yeah. So it was in 1993. And it was 2 scientists called McGuinness and Fogue, F-O-E-G, I don't know, Fogue. So they published an article that was called Actual Causes of Death in the United States. And they declared that diet and activity patterns was one of the main reasons why Americans died, alongside, guns and smoking and stuff. Basically what then happened, they released a study, and then every single newspaper picked it up and said, fat kills. And they were like, whoa, wait, what? No, eating and exercise. But by then, it was in every single newspaper. It was just like, oh, being fat kills you. That's why you die. You die from obesity. Obesity kills you. And these 2 guys were like, right, okay, we need to fix this. So they were demanding, they did so much work trying to demand that people stop misquoting them, and that corrected it. So, the papers would, on like page 29 in the corner, they'd be like, whoopsie, we meant eating. But by then, now it's just accepted as a fact based on them seriously misreading a study. That study the headline might as well have been guns kill,
right?
But still, it was like, but that doesn't really sound as good as fat kills. Fatness kills, when actually the study showed that the diet and exercise pattern had nothing to do with, we know BMI is flawed, but had nothing to do with how fat you were, basically. So you could be thin and have an unhealthy diet and not exercise at all, and you would be as much of a risk of dying than if you were fat and did the same thing, or you could be fat and healthy and you wouldn't die early. It had nothing to do with weight. But the whole world just went, okay, so fat kills.
Right. And you're right. It's like it becomes this mythical thing because of the headlines. And then if there is any correction, it's like so buried, nobody ever looks at it. Journalists don't even think that, because my background is as a journalist, actually. My first career was in food and nutrition media. And there's an editorial decision that goes into the choice to cover everything. So it's like, we're going to cover this splashy new study because it's like counterintuitive. And especially in the 90s, it was so early in the genesis of this idea that like fat was unhealthy. Like that was still sort of a novel thing. So to have headlines that say fat kills was like, whoa, like that was what every journalist and editor sort of looks for, is this like counterintuitive point. And then it's not the counterintuitive point to be like, oh, actually they were talking about food and physical activity, not about fat. Like, sorry, we fucked up. That's not going to make big headlines or be like a large story.
Yeah, it's amazing the way people assume that science means this is a fact, and they assume that it's simple. There's the David Allison case is amazing. So he's, this, you must have heard about him as well. It's almost so, it's just so silly that this is a thing, but it just kills all these ideas that science and what you read about science in newspapers is real. When he was like, 400,000 people die of fatness.
Right.
And then everyone just like, it was everywhere. It was like Wall Street Journal or whatever. It was everywhere. And then when they actually poked holes in his study, he was like, maybe I meant more like 26,000 or something. And then when you look into where he's getting all of his money from to do this research, it's like, Slim Fast and Weight Watchers, like basically every single diet industry company has basically paid him to say that a lot of, and that's just what always happens. Like, look at that, look at the money. Where's the money? No one puts money into fat positive research. No one wants to. Who makes money off of fat positivity? No one makes money. I mean, hopefully I do, because buy my book. But,
yes.
But like no one makes money off of it. So no one wants to invest money into it. But who makes money off of fat hatred? Everyone. Everyone makes money.
Yeah, all these companies.
So for the money, if someone makes money off of it, be wary, unless it's me, because buy my book.
Totally. And also, like, you making money off your book is like one person. It's not a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It's like,
oh yeah,
you deserve money to live, and like, but Weight Watchers is like a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Like,
also, I've been underpaid and mistreated because
exactly.
I'm just taking back what's owed to me.
Yes, it's just reparations for like what you've gone through. I mean, oh God. Well, I mean, I could talk to you forever. This is so wonderful, and I'm so glad to have you on the show. Can you tell us more about the book and where people can find it?
Yeah, so do you know if most of your listeners is it international, right?
It is, yeah. So we definitely have a bunch in the UK and like all over Europe. And then it's, primarily in the US, but I think a lot of people will order a book that's good from anywhere. Like you can get it on Amazon UK. I think you can get it shipped to the US. So like, why not?
I think so. That's doing Kindle, maybe audio.
Yeah. Kindle has it too.
I don't know. But, and also, I hopefully eventually it will be in most. I don't know about most countries, but I know it's coming out in Denmark soon. So hopefully,
nice.
Anyways, it's called Happy Fat. It's part memoir, part my ranting, part bunch of stuff about clothes and dating and fat fucking, and it's how to love your body, and it's how to be a good friend of fat people, and it's more about my childhood and my relationship with my body and how that kind of came to a good place. The cover is me with a face painted on my stomach. It's very
Love
cute.
That. It is.
Basically, it's out in the UK on May 2nd, and in Denmark from January 2020, and Sweden, I think, as well. If people sign up for my newsletter, I can I'll just let people know when it's out in different countries. And I'm also got stand-up tours happening all around the UK and sometimes also the world. So I think my newsletter is kind of the place to go for stuff to do with me.
Nice. And what's your website URL so people can find you?
SofieHagen.com, and that's SOFIEHAGEN.
Amazing. We'll put links to that in the show notes too, so people can find you and order the book and find out all of the stuff you're doing. I love your work. I love your stand-up and your podcast, and you're just doing such amazing things. So I can't wait for the book to come out.
Thank you. I guess I should have plugged the podcast as well. I'm so bad at plugging. I have a new podcast called Secret Dinosaur Cult, which is this like non-binary queer podcast it's a comedy podcast. It's live. It's about trauma and dinosaurs and daddy issues. It's very fun.
Ooh, it's so cool. I love it. I love all the podcasts you do too. I feel like you're very prolific in that space. It's awesome.
I love podcasting so much. I love it so much. No, who would hire us to do this? Like, who would put this on a radio show? Who would listen? This is amazing. I love podcasting and you're doing amazing work with yours. I'm so pleased you're doing this.
Thank you so much. I love doing it too. It's just such a joy to talk to people like you from all around the world and talk about this stuff. And yeah, like nobody's going to pay me to do this on the radio. So happy I get to do it myself.
Exactly. I'm glad you're doing it yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's great talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to Sofie Hagen for joining us on this episode, and thanks to you for listening. If you've gotten something out of this podcast, please help us reach more people who need to hear the anti-diet message by sharing this episode on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or your favorite podcast platform, whatever that may be. And be sure you're subscribed to the show as well. Just go to christyharrison.com/subscribe to do it. That's christyharrison.com/subscribe. If you're looking for some practical tips to help you get started on the anti-diet path, grab my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Just go to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. That's christyharrison.com/strategies. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we discussed, plus a full transcript, go to christyharrison.com/195. That's christyharrison.com/195. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode was brought to you by my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. If you're ready to make peace with food, break free from diet culture, and reclaim the life it stole from you, come join this course for a wealth of support and guidance. Enrollment closes in 2 weeks if you're listening to this episode the day it comes out, so now is the best time to join. Just go to christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. A big thanks to our editor and engineer, Mike Lalonde, our community and content associate, Vinci Chue, and our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Meredith Noble, and our theme song was written and performed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.